Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you lost, even though you couldn't explain why? Maybe someone made you doubt yourself. Maybe they smiled while quietly taking away your confidence. Maybe they convinced you that your own instincts were wrong. The frightening truth is that the world's greatest manipulators rarely use force. They use your emotions. They wait for your anger. They wait for your guilt. They wait for your need to be understood. They wait for your desire to be loved. And the moment they find the emotion you cannot control, they own you. Niccolò Machiavelli understood something most people still refuse to accept. Whoever controls your reactions controls your life. The strongest people are not those who fight harder. They are the ones who become impossible to move. Today you'll discover the psychological principles that make manipulation almost impossible. By the end of this video, you'll begin seeing people differently, and you'll realize why some individuals always seem untouchable, no matter what happens around them. But first, write this affirmation in the comments. I control my mind. No one controls me. That single sentence is more powerful than it appears. Now, let's begin. The greatest manipulation never feels like manipulation. It feels like concern. It feels like love. It feels like advice. It feels like someone simply wanting what's best for you. This is why intelligent people are manipulated every day. They are not defeated by force. They are defeated by perception. The most dangerous people are rarely loud or aggressive. They don't need to threaten you because they understand that influence is far more powerful than intimidation. Instead of pushing you, they gently guide you until you begin making decisions that benefit them, while believing those decisions were entirely your own. Machiavelli observed rulers closely, and one lesson appeared again and again. People rarely attack where your armor is strongest. They attack where your emotions are exposed. Think about it. Why does an insult from a stranger disappear in minutes, while a single sentence from someone close to you can echo for years? Because manipulation doesn't enter through logic. It enters through attachment. The manipulator studies your emotional investments. They learn what you fear losing: respect, love, status, approval, identity. They don't rush the process. They observe patiently, waiting for patterns to emerge. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to gather information. Every emotional reaction becomes another clue about what truly controls you. Then they quietly position themselves between you and those desires. Suddenly, your happiness depends on their opinion. Your confidence depends on their validation. Your peace depends on their mood. Without realizing it, you've handed them the keys to your emotional kingdom. This is exactly what Machiavelli warned against. A prince who depends on another's mercy is already weak, no matter how strong his army appears. Your emotions work the same way. The moment another person can predict your reactions, they can begin designing them. They know what words make you angry. They know what silence makes you anxious. They know what compliments make you obedient. And once your reactions become predictable, your choices stop being your own. Modern psychology describes this as emotional conditioning. When the same trigger produces the same response over and over again, your brain begins reacting automatically instead of consciously. The manipulator doesn't have to force you anymore. They simply press the right emotional button and allow your own habits to do the rest. This is why becoming impossible to manipulate doesn't begin by studying other people. It begins by studying yourself. Every emotional wound becomes a doorway. Every insecurity becomes a handle. Every unmet need becomes leverage. The strongest fortress is not built with thicker walls. It is built by removing every entrance the enemy expects to use. And that journey begins with one uncomfortable question. What emotion controls you the most? Because whatever your answer is, that is where your freedom begins. Power begins where dependence ends. This idea sounds simple. Living it changes everything. Manipulators survive on your needs, not your money, not your intelligence, your needs. The need to be liked, the need to win every argument, the need to prove yourself, the need to explain, the need to receive an apology. As long as one of these needs controls you, someone else can use it against you. They don't need to overpower you physically or intellectually. They only need to recognize the one thing you can't live without. Once they discover it, they can make you chase, justify, defend, and compromise, all while believing you're acting freely. Machiavelli understood that rulers who depended on public affection eventually became prisoners of public opinion. The same happens in everyday life. Imagine two people receiving harsh criticism. The first immediately defends himself. He argues, explains, justifies, and desperately tries to repair his image. Every word he speaks reveals how badly he wants acceptance. The more he explains, the more control he unknowingly gives away. The second simply listens. He doesn't rush. He doesn't panic. He doesn't chase approval. Who appears stronger? The second person. Not because he never feels pain, but because he refuses to let pain become visible leverage. This doesn't mean suppressing emotion. It means mastering it. The manipulator expects urgency. They expect emotional hunger. They expect you to chase. When you don't, their strategy begins to collapse. One of the greatest forms of freedom is becoming comfortable with misunderstanding. Most people spend years trying to convince everyone that they're good, honest, and worthy. They exhaust themselves managing perceptions instead of managing themselves. The wise person understands something different. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every insult deserves attention. Silence often protects more power than perfect arguments ever could, because every unnecessary explanation reveals your emotional investment. Every desperate defense announces exactly where you're vulnerable. The less emotional permission you give strangers, or even those closest to you, to define your worth, the stronger your internal foundation becomes. Eventually, something remarkable happens. People stop testing you, not because they've suddenly become kinder, but because they've realized they can no longer predict what will move you. And when someone can no longer exploit your need for approval, your fear of rejection, or your desire to always be understood, they lose their greatest advantage. True independence isn't about needing no one. It's about never allowing your peace to depend entirely on someone else's opinion. And unpredictability, born from self-sufficiency, is where real power quietly begins. Most people mistake emotional control for emotional suppression. They're not the same thing. Suppression hides emotion. Mastery governs it. Imagine throwing a stone into a calm lake. The surface ripples. Then everything becomes still again. Now imagine throwing the same stone into a raging storm. The waves grow larger until nothing beneath the surface can be seen. Your mind works the same way. Manipulators don't create problems because they enjoy conflict. They create emotional storms because storms make people predictable. An angry person speaks too much. A fearful person obeys too quickly. A lonely person trusts too easily. A guilty person surrenders without resistance. Every emotional extreme weakens judgment and strengthens impulse. Machiavelli understood that the person who cannot govern himself can never truly govern his circumstances. A wise ruler never allowed temporary emotions to dictate permanent decisions, because emotions pass while consequences remain. The same principle applies to your daily life. Most of the mistakes people regret were not made during moments of calm. They were made in moments of emotional urgency. Modern psychology supports this idea. When your emotions become overwhelming, the rational part of your mind loses influence. You stop evaluating the situation objectively and begin reacting instinctively. That is exactly the mental state a manipulator wants you to enter. Notice how skilled manipulators rarely begin with facts. They begin with feelings. They provoke outrage. They awaken jealousy. They create fear. They trigger guilt. Only after your emotions have taken control do they offer their version of reality. By then, your mind is searching for relief instead of truth, making you far easier to influence. The antidote is surprisingly simple. Delay your reaction. When someone insults you, pause. When someone pressures you, pause. When someone demands an immediate answer, pause. Those few seconds may seem insignificant, but they break the invisible chain between stimulus and response. In that brief silence, you regain ownership of your mind. You stop reacting like a puppet and begin acting like a strategist. The strongest response is rarely the fastest one. It is the one chosen with intention. Calmness unsettles manipulators because it gives them nothing to work with. They cannot feed your anger if you refuse to become angry. They cannot exploit your fear if you refuse to panic. They cannot control a person whose emotions obey discipline instead of impulse. Real power is not proving you cannot feel. Real power is proving that your feelings no longer make your decisions for you. When your inner world remains steady, even in the middle of chaos, you become someone others can no longer read, rush, or control. And that is when manipulation begins to lose its power over you. Manipulators don't fear strength. They fear limits. A clear boundary is one of the few things they cannot negotiate. Notice how manipulation almost never begins with a major demand. It begins with something small, a little disrespect, a small favor, a harmless joke at your expense, a request that makes you slightly uncomfortable, a promise that they'll make it up to you later. None of these seem significant on their own. But together, they slowly train you to accept more tomorrow than you accepted today. Psychologists call this the foot in the door effect. Once someone gets you to agree to a small request, you're far more likely to agree to a larger one later, because your mind wants to remain consistent with its previous decisions. Machiavelli understood this principle centuries before psychology gave it a name. He knew that power is rarely stolen overnight. It is surrendered piece by piece. One ignored insult, one unnecessary apology, one broken promise you choose to overlook, one compromise against your own values, then another and another, until one day you realize you've been living according to someone else's expectations instead of your own principles. This is why boundaries are so powerful. They interrupt the pattern before it becomes a habit. A healthy boundary doesn't require shouting. It doesn't require threats. It doesn't require convincing anyone that you're right. It simply requires consistency. You calmly say no. You calmly walk away. You calmly refuse to participate without guilt, without anger, without endless explanations. This is what frustrates manipulators the most. They expect resistance they can argue with. They expect emotion they can exploit. They expect guilt they can magnify. Instead, they encounter certainty, and certainty cannot be negotiated. Many people believe setting boundaries will make others dislike them. The opposite is often true. Healthy people respect clear limits because they understand mutual respect. Only those who benefited from your lack of boundaries become upset when you finally establish them. Their frustration isn't proof that you've done something wrong. It's often proof that your boundaries are working. Every time you protect your time, your values, your peace, or your self-respect, you send a quiet message to the world. Access to your life is a privilege, not an entitlement. Machiavelli knew that authority without limits quickly disappears. The same is true for personal dignity. If you allow everyone unlimited access to your energy, eventually you'll have none left for yourself. True strength is not forcing people to stay. It is remaining completely at peace if the wrong people choose to leave. Because the moment your boundaries become stronger than your fear of losing others, you become someone who cannot be manipulated through guilt, pressure, or obligation. And that is where real freedom begins. Most people think attachment is love. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's dependence wearing love's clothing. The difference is simple. Love gives freedom. Dependence creates fear. Manipulators thrive wherever fear exists because fear makes people predictable. If they know you're terrified of losing their approval, they'll withhold it. If they know you fear being abandoned, they'll threaten to leave. If they know your happiness depends on them, they don't have to force your obedience. You'll give it willingly. Machiavelli repeatedly warned against placing your security in the hands of anyone whose interests could change. Human nature is unstable. Affection fades. Loyalties shift. Circumstances change without warning. The person who praises you today may criticize you tomorrow. If your identity is built on another person's opinion, your peace will rise and fall with theirs. That is not freedom. It is emotional dependence. Detachment is often misunderstood as becoming cold or uncaring. It is neither. Detachment means caring deeply without becoming controlled by the outcome. It means appreciating people without making them responsible for your self-worth. It means understanding that losing someone's presence should never mean losing yourself. The detached person can love without clinging. They can give without expecting constant validation. They can forgive without forgetting their value. And when necessary, they can walk away without carrying resentment for years. This kind of independence unsettles manipulators because every one of their favorite tactics begins to fail. The guilt trips lose their weight. The silent treatment loses its sting. The emotional blackmail loses its leverage. Even threats begin to sound empty. When someone says, "You'll regret losing me," the detached mind doesn't react with panic. It quietly responds, "Perhaps. But I would regret losing myself even more." That single shift changes everything. You stop making decisions out of fear. You stop chasing people who enjoy being chased. You stop begging for respect that should have been freely given. Instead, you become anchored in something no one else can take from you, your own character. Machiavelli understood that the strongest position is the one from which you can leave if necessary. The person who has nothing to lose cannot be intimidated by the threat of loss. This doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you stop bargaining with your dignity to keep love. Freedom begins the moment your peace no longer depends on someone choosing you every day. Because when your happiness comes from within instead of from another person's approval, manipulation has nowhere left to attach itself. And a person who cannot be emotionally hooked is a person who cannot be emotionally controlled. The easiest person to manipulate is the one whose emotions are always visible. Every frustration is posted. Every victory is announced. Every disappointment is explained. Every insecurity is confessed. Without realizing it, many people hand others an instruction manual for controlling them. Every emotional reaction reveals another pattern. Every overshared feeling provides another clue. A patient observer doesn't need years to understand you if you reveal everything within a few conversations. Machiavelli admired strategic restraint. Not deception for its own sake, but disciplined self-command. He understood that information is a form of power, and power should never be given away carelessly. The more others know about what excites you, frightens you, or offends you, the easier it becomes for them to influence your behavior. You don't have to reveal every opinion. You don't have to react to every accusation. You don't have to explain every silence. Most people speak because silence makes them uncomfortable. The wise person becomes comfortable with silence because silence invites observation. While everyone else is busy proving themselves, they are quietly learning about everyone in the room. Observe more than you speak. Listen more than you reveal. Ask questions before answering them. Watch how people behave when they don't receive the reaction they expected. That moment tells you everything. Some become impatient, some become louder, some suddenly become kind. Others expose their true intentions because their usual methods no longer work. When people cannot predict your emotional responses, they begin revealing their own. This is one of the greatest psychological advantages you can possess. It allows you to see character instead of performance. Remember, unpredictability does not mean inconsistency. It means refusing to become emotionally automatic. Your principles remain steady. Your values remain firm. Only your reactions become intentional. That difference changes the balance of every interaction. Real power rarely announces itself. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't need constant recognition. It simply refuses to become emotionally available for manipulation. Over time, people stop trying to provoke you because they realize every attempt produces the same result: calmness, clarity, control. Eventually, your presence alone begins to command respect, not because others fear you, but because they recognize they cannot influence you through emotion. Machiavelli understood that the hardest opponent to defeat is not the strongest or the loudest. It is the one whose mind remains hidden behind discipline. Become that person. Not mysterious for attention, not silent to appear powerful, but so deeply grounded in self-control that no one can predict, provoke, or program your next move. And when your mind belongs completely to you, the games that once trapped you simply stop working. No one becomes impossible to manipulate overnight. This isn't a trick, it's a transformation. Every day you pause before reacting, you grow stronger. Every boundary you enforce strengthens your character. Every need for approval you release gives you another piece of your freedom back. One day you'll notice something remarkable. The people who once upset you so no longer affect you. The insults that once lingered disappear within minutes. The guilt that once controlled your decisions no longer has a voice. Not because the world became kinder, because you became harder to move. Machiavelli knew that the greatest form of power was never domination over others. It was mastery over yourself.